Welcome to the Change Advisory Board, also known as the CAB Call. This podcast is brought to you by Nicholas King and Columbia CloudWorks. Okay, so let's unpack this today. We are setting out on a mission that, at first glance, it might seem like someone accidentally knocked over two completely different filing cabinets and just shoved all the papers together.
Yeah, that's definitely one way to put it.
Right, because we were looking at an unexpected, but just an absolutely fascinating collision between ancient esoteric philosophy, specifically Freemasonry and the Scottish Rite, and the bleeding-edge technical world of site reliability engineering and cybersecurity.
It sounds like a massive stretch, I know. But once we start laying these frameworks side by side, it is really remarkable how closely these two worlds align. We are basically taking the operational mindset of a systems engineer and bridging it with the philosophical foundation of a master mason.
Exactly. And for you listening, whether you are trying to prep for an IT strategy meeting, or looking to catch up on the latest cybersecurity paradigms, or you're just someone who loves insanely curious connections, this deep dive is for you. We are going to explore how the process of building scalable, highly secure digital systems perfectly mirrors the ancient quest for moral and spiritual perfection.
Yeah, the parallels they're wild once you see them.
They really are. And we have a pretty substantial stack of sources to guide us through this deep dive.
Right.
On the esoteric side, we're pulling from foundational texts on Masonic ritual. So we have Albert Pike's monumental work, Morals and Dogma.
Which is heavy.
Very heavy. We've also got Clausen's commentaries, a widely used study guide called A Bridge to Light, the Scottish Rite Ritual Monitoring Guide, and some really interesting historical context from the Triptych Masons and the Square magazine.
Right. And to balance that out on the technical side, we are looking at the definitive O'Reilly text, Site Reliability Engineering, a really comprehensive industry guide from Whisper It on privileged user responsibilities, and a highly influential, honestly kind of provocative paper by Phil Rogoway on the moral character of cryptographic work.
So here is the core premise we are putting to the test today.
Yeah.
What if the principles of managing a massive global cloud infrastructure and the philosophical path to becoming a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason are fundamentally the exact same discipline?
What's fascinating here is that both of these disciplines are, at their core, about architecture.
Right.
They are about designing and maintaining systems that can withstand chaos, human error, and external threats, all while constantly striving for a state of higher reliability. In the Masonic sense, that higher reliability is referred to as light or truth.
Truth, exactly.
But to really understand this, we have to start where any good architect starts, at the foundation.
The base layer. And a listener actually sent in a prompt question that perfectly frames this first section. They asked, and I'm quoting here, "In systems architecture, we build advanced services on top of a reliable base layer. Does the Scottish Rite act as a new operating system altogether, or is it strictly an expansion pack that relies completely on the base infrastructure established in the Craft Lodge?"
It's a brilliant question. Let's look at the text side first. In the O'Reilly SRE text, there is a heavy recurring emphasis on the fact that advanced services and multi-layered systems absolutely must be built on top of a reliable, resilient base layer.
You can't just build on sand.
Exactly. You cannot build a highly available, complex web application if the underlying operating system or the physical network infrastructure is fundamentally unstable. If your base layer is flawed, no amount of elegant code in the upper layers is going to save you from a catastrophic crash. The entire stack relies on the integrity of that foundation.
Okay, so applying that to the Masonic side, we have to look at how Freemasonry is actually structured. For anyone who isn't familiar, the foundation of all Freemasonry is what's called the Blue Lodge, or the Craft Lodge. This consists of the first 3 degrees, entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason.
Right.
That is the base operating system. According to the Scottish Rite overview in our sources, you cannot even be initiated into the Scottish Rite, which comprises degrees 4 through 32, unless you are already a master mason in good standing in a Blue Lodge.
Which directly answers the prompt. The Scottish Rite is absolutely not a new operating system. It is strictly an expansion pack. It amplifies, it elaborates, and it adds incredible complexity to the craft. But it relies entirely on the base infrastructure of the Blue Lodge.
So it's an add-on.
Exactly. In fact, the sources explicitly state that the Supreme Councils of the Scottish Rite do not assume any authority over those first 3 degrees. They completely respect the base layer's autonomy.
I love the clarity of that dependency. And the ultimate proof of this is a specific rule highlighted in our research. The termination of a member's symbolic lodge, or Blue Lodge, standing automatically and immediately terminates their Scottish Rite membership.
Yep. If the base layer goes down, the upper-level services crash immediately. There is no independent existence for those advanced philosophical services without the foundation of basic morality and brotherhood established in those first 3 degrees.
So if the Blue Lodge boots up the hardware and gets the basic protocols running, then the 4th through 14th degrees of the Scottish Rite, which are collectively called the Lodge of Perfection, act as the first major software update.
The Lodge of Perfection, right?
You're essentially installing new philosophical modules and deeper ethical processing capabilities. But that brings up a massive logistical challenge.
The sheer volume of information.
Yes. Another prompt we received touched on this, drawing on principles from Limoncelli's time management for system administrators. How do active Scottish Rite Masons balance the incredibly heavy reading load of text like Pike's Morals and Dogma with the unpredictable, demanding schedules of something like IT operations or system administration?
It's a huge issue.
Because Morals and Dogma, published back in 1871, is a dense, monumental philosophical text. The Fourth Degree chapter is unusually concise, only about 7 pages, but generally the reading load is staggering. It is not light reading for your daily commute.
No, it's a very real problem, and it's where the concept of cognitive load management comes into play. In site reliability engineering, managing cognitive load is a massive priority. The O'Reilly SRE book repeatedly points out that SREs despise manual operations.
They hate toil.
Exactly, they call it toil. When you are managing a complex global scale system, you cannot rely on human engineers to manually interpret every single alert or memorize the nuances of every system configuration. Human memory is fallible, and engineers simply get overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data during an incident.
Because if a server goes down at 3 a.m., you don't have the time or the brain power to sit there and read the original source code to figure out what went wrong. You need an immediate answer.
Precisely. To prevent that cognitive overload, SREs use highly structured runbooks and clear, concise guidelines. A runbook is a distilled, practical document that tells an engineer exactly what the system is supposed to do, what specific error symbols mean, and how to safely operate or troubleshoot the system without having to reverse engineer everything from scratch.
Okay, so how does the modern Masonic learner cope with the massive 19th century code base of Morals and Dogma? When taking on the 4th through 32nd degrees, are supplementary texts considered the definitive runbooks? Or is self-guided interpretation preferred?
Well, our sources show that they use supplementary texts in a way that perfectly mirrors IT runbooks. The research outlines a sort of perfect trifecta of information for initiates. The primary tool is a book called A Bridge to Light by Rex Hutchins. In one of our sources, they actually describe this book as the Cliff Notes Handbook for Scottish Rite initiates.
Cliff Notes.
It breaks down the themes and distills the main ideas of the rituals into digestible statements.
It functions exactly like a quick reference guide. And then alongside that, you have Arturo de Hoyo's Scottish Rite Ritual Monitor and Guide. If A Bridge to Light is your quick reference sheet, the Monitor and Guide is the expanded system documentation. It meticulously details every symbol, the physical paraphernalia used in the degrees, and sets up the historical and mythological context for each stage.
But that brings up an interesting tension.
Wait, yeah, so if Pike's Morals and Dogma is the original text, why not just read that? Are these study guides considered the definitive, absolute interpretation?
That is where the philosophy becomes really practical. If we look at how an SRE interacts with a runbook, they know that a runbook is a living document. It's not a sacred, infallible text.
Right.
It's a tool to guide your decision-making, but you always have to evaluate it against the current real-world reality of the system. If the runbook says one thing, but your system telemetry and your own eyes tell you something else, you have to use your judgment.
And that maps flawlessly to the Scottish Rite's approach to its own texts. There's a brilliant quote from the opening pages of A Bridge to Light that addresses this. It clarifies that the word dogma in Pike's title simply means doctrine or teaching. It is explicitly not meant to be taken as rigid, unquestionable truth.
It's a framework, not a cage.
Exactly. The source says, and I'll quote here, "Everyone is entirely free to reject or dissent from whatever herein seemed to him to be untrue or unsound. It only asks that the reader weigh what is taught and give it a fair hearing."
Which is such a healthy approach to complex systems. It's an invitation to critical thinking. You are entirely free to reject what doesn't align with your own understanding of truth. Just like an SRE evaluating a playbook, it's a guide to be evaluated and adapted, not followed blindly if it doesn't fit the reality of the environment you're operating in.
So we're talking about constantly evaluating these guides, adapting them, and acknowledging that the texts and the human beings reading them are fundamentally fallible. That brings us to a huge concept. How do we handle failure?
Because failure is inevitable.
Right. If we are expected to constantly improve, what happens when we inevitably mess up? A listener asked, SREs use error budgets because 100% reliability is impossible. How does the Scottish Rite's demand for continuous self-improvement in the pursuit of Masonic light address the reality of human fallibility and the impossibility of achieving a perfectly rough ashlar?
Okay, in the tech world, we handle the inevitability of failure through the concept of the error budget. This is a foundational tenet detailed in the O'Reilly text, and it represents a massive paradigm shift from traditional IT. Historically, the goal for IT operations was 100% uptime, zero outages, absolute perfection. But SRE recognizes that 100% reliability is structurally impossible.
Because hardware degrades, software has bugs, and human beings make typos.
Exactly. But beyond being impossible, aiming for 100% is actually detrimental to the business. If you demand perfect stability, you can never change anything. It stifles innovation and prevents you from deploying new, necessary features. So SREs explicitly expect outages. Failure is a mathematical certainty and an expected part of the innovation process.
I want to make sure I understand how this actually works in practice for the listener who might be new to this. How do you actually budget for failure?
They use metrics. First, you have SLIs, or service level indicators. Think of an SLI as the speedometer on your car. It just tells you exactly how fast you are going right now. Or, in tech terms, what percentage of user requests are currently succeeding. Then you have SLOs, or service level objectives. That's the speed limit you've agreed upon. You might say your SLO is 99.9% uptime. That means you are explicitly allowing for 0.1% downtime.
Okay.
That 0.1% gap between perfect reliability and your objective is your error budget. It's the amount of acceptable failure you have to play with while you innovate.
Okay, that makes perfect sense for a web server.
Yeah.
But how does that concept of an error budget possibly apply to a Masonic lodge? Are you saying there's an equivalent for human behavior?
Precisely. Based on our sources, the Scottish Rite operates on what we could call a moral error budget. When you enter the fourth degree, the secret master, you are stepping into what is called the Lodge of Perfection. The stated goal is the attainment of knowledge and moving out of darkness into light. But the texts are deeply, profoundly realistic about human nature.
Right, Clausen's commentaries dive into this. They remind the reader that achieving a perfectly smooth ashlar, which is Masonic terminology for a flawless, morally perfect human being, is impossible in this life. The text notes that he who hurts another only harms himself. And it acknowledges that while repentance doesn't magically erase a bad deed or rewrite history, we can always strive to increase the good.
The system explicitly acknowledges that bugs, in this case moral failings or ethical lapses, will occur. Masonry, as Clausen points out, cannot teach. It can only help us learn through developmental stages. It's all about iterative progress.
Which is the essence of that progress, right? Think about your own workflow or personal development. When you try to adopt a new habit or when a developer pushes a small code update, you don't expect it to be flawless forever. You monitor it, you learn from where it breaks down, and you try again.
Another listener prompt actually framed this perfectly from the perspective of a secret master aspiring to be an SRE. They asked, as a secret master, my duty is the continuous study and iterative pursuit of truth. How does the DevOps philosophy of continuous integration and continuous deployment, or CI/CD, mirror this progressive journey toward a perfected system state?
It's a direct mirror.
It really is. You don't try to build a perfect monolithic system in one massive, flawless deployment. You progress through stages from the fourth degree to the fifth, iterating all the way up to the 32nd. You are constantly patching, upgrading, and refining your personal architecture. You observe the results of your actions, you learn from your mistakes, and you continuously push updates toward a perfected state.
But you do this fully acknowledging that 100% perfection is an asymptote. You will get closer and closer, but you will never actually reach it.
Right. And you have an error budget to forgive yourself along the way.
To really bring that architectural metaphor to life, there's an incredible piece of lore from the Cryptic Masons monitor in our stack of sources. For the listener who might not be familiar, Cryptic Masonry is another branch of the fraternity that expands on the story of the hidden vault beneath King Solomon's temple. Their monitor states that the first temple, which is symbolic of our present, flawed, mortal life, must be destroyed so that the second temple, representing eternal life, can be built upon the Masonic stone of foundation, which represents divine truth.
The infrastructure parallels there are just staggering.
Right. You literally have to tear down the old legacy code to deploy the new, resilient architecture. You can't just slap a fresh coat of paint on a crumbling server and call it an upgrade. To reach that next stage of reliability, you have to gracefully sunset the old environment, accept its destruction, and migrate to a new system built on a more solid foundation.
But that transition, moving from the old environment to the new, or even just maintaining the core systems, requires intense security. Which brings us to perhaps the most compelling paradox in our entire deep dive today.
The tension between absolute secrecy and absolute observability.
Yes.
This is where we get into the heavy lore of the fourth degree, the secret master. Let's set the stage with a quick sort of explain it like I'm five at the mythology. In the Blue Lodge, the central allegory revolves around a character named Hiram Abiff. He's the mythological chief architect of King Solomon's temple. According to the legend, he is killed by rogue workers because he refuses to give up the secret passwords of a master mason.
He protects the root access keys.
He does. So when you reach the fourth degree of the Scottish Rite, Hiram is dead. The temple is in mourning, and the initiate is appointed as a secret master. Their primary duty is to guard the sanctum sanctorum, the Holy of Holies, where the most sacred artifacts reside.
And part of that duty involves being given an ivory key.
Yes. The ritual says this ivory key symbolizes the true understanding of Freemasonry and the key to the mysteries, which you are supposed to use to regulate your own life and conduct. But the overriding demand placed on the secret master is strict secrecy and silence. This isn't just about keeping club passwords safe. The secrecy is framed as a rigorous internal discipline and a profound trust-building exercise.
But this raises an incredibly important question when we bridge these two worlds. A listener phrased it this way. The fourth degree emphasizes strict secrecy and silence. In DevOps, how do we reconcile the need for cryptographic privacy, relying on the foundational principles of Chom or Diffie-Hellman, with the SRE demand for total system observability and transparent, blameless postmortems?
It seems like a massive contradiction.
It does, because in the tech world, the equivalent of the secret master guarding the Holy of Holies is the privileged user.
The admins with root access. The sysadmins.
Exactly, the engineers holding the keys to the kingdom. And according to the guide from Whisperit and our sources, compromised privileged accounts are involved in a staggering 33% of all cybersecurity incidents. If a malicious actor gets a hold of an admin's credentials, they bypass every external firewall and lock you have.
So the core defense mechanism for a privileged user in a modern tech environment isn't just hiding in silence. It relies heavily on the principle of least privilege.
Meaning you only get access to what you strictly need.
Right, and multi-factor authentication, or MFA. Just as the secret master is tasked with guarding the Holy of Holies, an SRE uses these mechanisms to secure the core production environment from unauthorized access without bottlenecking the development team.
So we have an ancient system demanding absolute secrecy, and a modern system demanding we monitor everything to prevent breaches. How do those actually align? We have to separate the external posture from the internal reality. To understand the external posture, we look to Phil Rogoway's paper on the moral character of cryptographic work. And Rogoway argues that cryptography is not just applied mathematics. It is an inherently moral and political tool because it rearranges power.
How so? What does he mean by rearranging power?
By creating absolute secrecy through encryption, cryptography protects the individual and the organization against massive external threats, things like mass surveillance or malicious corporate espionage. It shifts the power balance from the surveyor to the surveyed. In our metaphor, cryptography creates an impenetrable wall around the sanctum sanctorum. To the outside world, you present nothing but silence and encrypted ciphertext.
Okay, I see. So to the uninitiated or the external network, a lodge is a fortress of absolute secrecy. But inside the lodge, on the internal network, it's a completely different paradigm. SREs cannot maintain a system they cannot see.
No, it's impossible.
The O'Reilly text goes into great detail about the necessity of white box monitoring. This is monitoring that relies on deep internal metrics, logs, and telemetry exposed by the system's own internals. You have to know exactly what the system is thinking and doing at all times.
Exactly. And Whisperit highlights the absolute necessity of session monitoring for those with root access. Every single keystroke, every action taken by a privileged user, our modern secret masters must be logged, monitored, and regularly reviewed.
So the synthesis here is actually a profound philosophy on trust. We build these massive cryptographic walls not to hide from each other, but to create a secure, isolated space where we can be completely transparent with each other. The sanctum sanctorum, the core production environment containing the organization's most sensitive data, is hidden from the world.
Shielded from the profane.
Yes, but inside that perimeter, every action of the secret masters must be auditable by the system. You implement strict audit trails to prevent insider threats.
And that ivory key given to the initiate in the fourth degree. Look at it through a modern lens. That is the ultimate cryptographic private key, or a physical hardware MFA token. It is the tangible proof of identity required to access the deepest mysteries of the production environment. You don't hand it out lightly, you guard it with your life, and the system makes a permanent, unalterable record every single time it is used.
Which naturally leads us to the worst-case scenario. What happens when the system crashes? Let's say a catastrophic infrastructure outage occurs, the sanctum sanctorum is breached, or the servers literally catch fire. Another listener prompt asks, the apron of the fourth degree reminds us of our strict obligations. When a catastrophic infrastructure outage occurs, is the SRE's philosophy driven by rigid dogmatic adherence to a runbook, or by adaptive on-the-fly problem-solving?
This is where we test the limits of those playbooks we discussed earlier. To answer this, we need to look at how the fourth degree defines the concept of duty.
Our sources highlight that Masonic duty is framed very specifically. It is performed not for earthly reward, for praise, or for honors, but for the simple expectation of personal satisfaction and alignment with truth. But more importantly, Pike's Morals and Dogma makes a clear distinction between divine or natural law and the law of the land.
Right.
It requires the Mason to balance obedience to both, but asserts that ultimately a person must follow their own conscience.
In the technology sector, that law of the land is the standard operating procedure. It's the legacy runbook approved by a committee 6 months ago. But when everything is on fire and the company is losing millions of dollars a minute, blind adherence to a flawed or outdated document will bring the entire organization down. This is where the O'Reilly concept of the blameless postmortem intersects beautifully with Masonic duty.
Break down the blameless postmortem for us. Why is it so crucial?
In traditional IT, when a massive failure happens, the immediate reaction of management is often to find out who did it, who pushed the bad code, who deleted the database. They want to assign blame and often fire that person. But SRE culture recognizes that if you punish people for making mistakes, they will simply hide their mistakes.
Which ruins your observability.
Exactly. You go dark. So in a blameless postmortem, the focus is entirely on the events, the system flaws, and the processes, never the people. The culture explicitly assumes that everyone involved had good intentions and did the best they could with the information and tools they had at the time. By removing the fear of punishment, you encourage engineers to step forward and uncover the absolute truth of the failure. You create a culture of psychological safety.
And during the actual incident itself, Whisperit notes that an admin must take immediate, decisive action. You don't sit around waiting for a change advisory board to approve an update to the runbook while the servers are melting.
No, you're triaging.
You are pulling physical cables, isolating compromised virtual machines, revoking suspect credentials on the fly, and implementing emergency network blocks to stop the bleeding.
Yeah.
You are acting on your conscience, your expertise, and your absolute duty to the system's survival.
Because true duty, whether you are a Scottish Rite Mason navigating an ethical dilemma or a site reliability engineer fighting off a cyber attack, is to the ultimate survival and health of the system. That is the divine law, the system integrity. It supersedes blind adherence to an outdated runbook. Incident response requires adaptive problem-solving driven by a deep moral duty to protect the organization's crown jewels.
And then, once the fire is out and the systems are restored, you conduct that blameless postmortem. You figure out what went wrong, you update the runbook, and you iteratively improve the system without shaming the individual. Which, if you think about it, aligns perfectly with the Masonic journey we discussed earlier. The continuous cycle of acknowledging human frailty, practicing self-forgiveness, learning from the error, and striving to increase the good in the next iteration.
It's all connected. We are talking about human beings managing complex systems, whether those systems are made of stone, code, or our own psychology.
We've talked a lot about human admins guarding these systems. But taking a step back, what happens when the privileged user, the secret master holding the keys, isn't actually a human being at all? We are rapidly moving into an era dominated by artificial intelligence and autonomous agents.
This is where the ancient philosophy becomes urgently relevant to the future. Square magazine actually touches on this in an article from our sources regarding Masonic reflections on cybersecurity. They note that Freemasonry's origins in the guilds of the Middle Ages promoted core values of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Today, they argue these ancient tenets must be applied to what they call cyber civility.
Cyber civility, I like that.
It's a great concept. It's the idea that ethical behavior, boundaries, and mutual respect cannot end at the keyboard. They must extend into the architecture of cyberspace itself.
Because securing AI is not just a technical puzzle of firewalls and encryption keys. It is profoundly a moral challenge. The sources highlight that bringing AI into an enterprise organization requires strict data governance, active measures to prevent algorithmic bias, and frameworks to ensure equitable use. You are no longer just guarding a database of passwords. You're the gatekeeper for AI models that will make decisions affecting human lives, trained on vast, sensitive pools of data.
Think about applying the principle of least privilege to an autonomous AI system. Determining what an AI needs to know versus what it wants to know requires a massive ethical compass. The values of liberty, equality, and fraternity aren't just quaint historical ideas. They are vital architectural requirements for ensuring that these emerging technologies respect human dignity rather than exploiting it.
And that brings the focus right back to you, the listener. Think about your own role in the systems you interact with every day. Whether you are actively coding a machine learning model, managing cloud capacity for a massive global enterprise, or simply trying to navigate your daily life and be a slightly better human being than you were yesterday, you are engaging in a form of architecture. You are building systems. And those systems require boundaries, they require ethical frameworks, a dedication to truth, and a profound understanding that perfection is an iterative journey, not a final destination.
To summarize the journey we've taken today, we have seen how the fourth-degree secret master, historically tasked with guarding the holy of holies in silent duty, is the philosophical and spiritual ancestor of the modern site reliability engineer guarding the root access keys of a cloud infrastructure. We've seen how both of these disciplines reject the illusion of immediate perfection and instead rely entirely on iterative progress. Both utilize the concept of error budgets, whether technical or moral, acknowledging, planning for, and forgiving human flaws. And fundamentally, both are dedicated to the relentless pursuit of light, which in the modern era translates directly to knowledge, truth, and total system observability.
It really makes you look at a blinking server rack and a Masonic apron in a completely different way. I want to leave you with a final lingering thought based on the text we've explored today. Phil Rogoway warned us that cryptography rearranges power. It decides who gets to see and who remains hidden. And the Scottish Rite teaches that true wisdom outlasts the rise and fall of physical empires. As we continue to build increasingly autonomous AI systems that act as the new secret masters of our digital world, whose moral code are we actually programming into their base infrastructure? Are we building a secure digital temple of truth? Or are we just architecting another system of mass surveillance? Something for you to mull over the next time you deploy an update or evaluate your own personal runbooks. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and as always, keep seeking your own knowledge.